Yeah, I would say both.
Smoking, period, is a nasty habit, you dig? And then the fact that it's not a healthy habit, it can affect your health down the line for constantly smoking and shit like that. So a habit could turn into a health hazard.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I said both.
No, I didn't hear you.
I said both. It can impact both. You heard? It can impact the action itself and the impact that it can have on your life. You know what I mean? Smoking is a nasty habit.
Smoking
you know?
what though?
Crack.
I ain't got nothing to do with that.
The fuck you talk about, man? I'm just sick of your shit today, man. You better leave me the fuck alone,
the
bro.
blood, I feel like
Jim Jones walked into that store thinking it was just another ordinary stop. Something quick, something simple, the kind of errand you run without giving it a second thought. He wasn't expecting anything to go sideways. He wasn't expecting cameras to come out, voices to rise, or for the whole thing to become a moment the entire internet would be dissecting. But that's exactly what happened. What started as a completely normal errand kept building, layer by layer, until it reached a point where there was no quietly walking it back. It all started with something small, a lock sitting on the shelf marked at $78. That was the number he saw, that was the number he trusted, and that was the number he was fully prepared to pay. In his mind, there was nothing complicated about it. You walk into a store, you see a price on an item, you take it to the register, you pay for it. That's how it works everywhere. That's how it's always worked. But this time, that simple process broke down completely. The moment the manager stepped in, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't calm anymore. It wasn't professional. It stopped feeling like a standard interaction between a customer and staff. It turned tense, uncomfortable, charged. You could hear it in Jim Jones's voice almost immediately. He wasn't yelling at first, but the frustration was already there. The confusion was there too. He kept returning to the same point. The price was placed directly under the item, and he hadn't done a single thing wrong. The way he described it, he was just standing there having a normal conversation, not causing any disruption, not raising his voice, not stepping out of line in any way. Then the manager walks in and approaches him like he's done something wrong. That's where the real issue began. Because at that point, it stopped being about the money. It stopped being about the price tag. It became about how he was being treated in that moment. You could see the shift when he started pointing out the way the manager came at him, not calm, not respectful, but more like an accusation, like he was trying to pull something over on the store rather than simply paying the price that was clearly displayed. That's what made Jim Jones push back harder. He wasn't about to just stand there and absorb that. He kept making the same point. The price was there, the store made the error, and when a store makes an error like that, they're expected to honor it. That's something most people believe. That's something shoppers expect anywhere they go. So from his perspective, he was standing on something completely reasonable. He wasn't asking for anything extra. He wasn't trying to beat the system. He was asking for exactly what was shown to him. But instead of the situation getting resolved quickly, it kept deteriorating. The manager didn't back down, Jim Jones didn't back down, and when both sides refuse to move, there's really only one direction things can go. The tension kept climbing. People inside the store started paying attention. Employees, other customers, everyone could feel that something wasn't right. At one point, you could hear him questioning the manager directly, in front of everyone, asking if this is really how customers are supposed to be treated, asking if this is what management actually looks like. Those questions weren't really about the moment anymore. They were about respect. They were about fairness, and once a situation reaches that territory, it becomes far bigger than whatever originally sparked it. Then it took another turn entirely. He started raising something deeper, questioning the way he was being treated had anything to do with who he is. That's when the situation became genuinely serious, because now it wasn't about a pricing mistake at all. Now it was about how a person feels they're being perceived and handled in a public space. The frustration in his voice grew more visible, his tone shifted, his words got more direct. He wasn't just speaking to the manager anymore, he was speaking to everyone watching. He was making it clear that he felt disrespected, that he felt targeted, that something about how this was being handled didn't sit right with him. Meanwhile, the situation kept getting messier as other employees began stepping in. Some were trying to de-escalate, some were attempting to complete the purchase, and that only made the manager's actions look more questionable in the moment. Because if the issue could have been resolved that easily, why did it ever reach that level? Why did it become an argument? Why did police even enter the conversation? Those are exactly the questions people started asking once the video began spreading. After everything settled, Jim Jones spoke about it again, and this time his tone carried a slightly different weight. Still firm, still standing on what he believed, but more reflective than before. He admitted he almost lost control. He admitted his initial reaction could have been far worse, but he made it clear that he pulled himself back. That part revealed something important. It showed he was fully aware of how close things came, that he understood the difference between reacting and completely losing it. And even though he felt deeply disrespected, he didn't cross that line. But he didn't change his position either. He still believed he was treated unfairly. He still believed the situation was mishandled from the very beginning. And he made it clear that the real issue was never just about the price. It was about how everything was handled from the moment the manager arrived. Then came what everyone expected, the internet reaction. And once that started, there was no slowing it down. People picked sides almost immediately. Some stood firmly behind Jim Jones, saying he held his ground and refused to let it slide. Others felt like it didn't need to escalate the way it did and could have been resolved differently. And then, just when the conversation was already running loud, 50 Cent stepped in. And when he did, he didn't come in with a serious take. He didn't come in trying to bring things down. He came in doing exactly what he always does, flipping the entire thing into entertainment. He cracked jokes about the situation, laughed at the whole ordeal, and even made comments about the money, suggesting he could just send a difference and end it right there. That changed the energy completely, because now, instead of remaining a serious discussion, it turned into content for a large portion of the audience. Memes started surfacing, comments came flooding in, and the focus shifted. A lot of people stopped debating what actually happened in that store and started laughing at the jokes instead. That's what happens when someone like 50 Cent inserts himself into a moment. He knows exactly how to reframe a situation and send it in a completely different direction. But even through all of that, the core question never went away. Who was actually in the wrong? Was it the manager and how he chose to handle it? Or did things escalate further than they ever needed to go? That's what kept the conversation alive. That's what kept people watching, commenting, and sharing. Because situations like this don't end when the video stops. They turn into debates. They turn into broader discussions, and everyone brings their own perspective to it. Through all of it, one thing remained clear. What started as a simple trip to the store became something far larger than anyone anticipated. As the video kept spreading, more angles of the situation began surfacing, and people started breaking down every moment inside that store. Some slowed the clips down, listening carefully to every exchange, trying to identify exactly where it all went wrong. Others focused on the body language, pinpointing the precise moment the tone shifted and how quickly calm turned into tension. It became one of those situations where everyone feels qualified to read it in their own way. What stood out to a lot of people was how fast things escalated once the manager stepped in. Before that point, it genuinely looked like a routine misunderstanding, the kind that gets sorted out in a few minutes. A quick price check, a short explanation, maybe a simple acknowledgement of the error, and it's over. But instead, the interaction immediately felt confrontational, and that's the detail people kept returning to. Jim Jones kept coming back to that same point in his own explanation. He wasn't just upset about the price, he was upset about how he felt approached. In his mind, the manager didn't show up to resolve anything, he showed up to challenge him. And when someone feels like they're being challenged rather than helped, emotions don't stay level for long. At the same time, there were people defending the manager's position. From his side of things, it may have looked like someone attempting to take advantage of a shelving mistake. Stores deal with exactly that kind of situation regularly. Items get misplaced, tags get moved, and some people do try to use that to their benefit. From that angle, some felt the manager was simply doing his job and protecting the store's interests. But even those people acknowledged that the execution could have been handled better. Because even when there's a legitimate dispute, how it's communicated changes everything. Tone matters, approach matters, and in this case, it seemed like neither side felt respected once the conversation began. As more footage came out, you could see moments where other employees were trying to quietly intervene. Some were speaking in lower tones, attempting to bring things back down. One employee even noted that the price should be honored, which made the whole thing even more puzzling. Because if that was the internal understanding, then the entire confrontation could have been avoided from the start. That's what made the situation feel so disorganized. Different people saying different things, no clear direction from management, no fast resolution, just tension continuing to build as more people stopped to watch. And once a crowd starts forming around a situation like that, it adds a layer of pressure that makes everything harder. It's harder to step back, harder to find calm, harder to land on a simple solution. Jim Jones at that point wasn't just speaking to the manager anymore. He was speaking to everyone in that store and to everyone who would eventually see the footage. He started making broader statements about how situations like this happen far too often, about how people are treated, about how quickly something minor can spiral into something major. And that's the moment it stopped being just about him and the manager and became something much bigger than that. The mention of police kept resurfacing, and that alone added an entirely new layer to everything. Even before they actually arrived, just knowing they'd been called shifted the energy completely. For Jim Jones, it felt completely unnecessary. From his perspective, there was no logical reason to bring law enforcement into a disagreement over a price. And once that thought settled in, it only deepened his frustration. At the same time, some people online argued that calling security or police is a standard store response when a situation gets heated, especially when voices are raised and things begin feeling out of hand. But again, that comes down to judgment. Had the situation genuinely reached that point, or was that step taken too quickly? That's exactly where opinions stayed divided. Another moment that landed hard was when Jim Jones talked about being made to feel like a criminal. That line stuck with a lot of viewers, because regardless of who was right or wrong about the price, nobody wants to feel like they're being treated as though they committed something serious when they genuinely believe they haven't. That feeling alone can completely alter how someone responds in the moment. Even as things began winding down, the tension didn't fully leave. You could still hear it in his voice as he kept talking. It wasn't pure anger anymore. It was frustration layered with disbelief, like he was still trying to make sense of how something so minor had spiraled into something so significant. Then came the online aftermath, and that's where everything truly took on its own life. People started building their own versions of the story. Some exaggerated details, some stripped it down, some turned it into jokes, others turned it into genuine conversations about customer service and how people are treated in public spaces. Clips got reposted repeatedly, each time landing in front of a fresh audience, and with each new audience came a new wave of opinions. Some people only caught a few seconds of the video and formed their entire judgment from that. Others watched the full thing and still walked away with completely different takeaways. That's how situations like this grow. They don't stay fixed, they shift depending on who's watching and what they bring to it. And then 50 Cent kept adding fuel in his own signature way. He didn't drop one comment and disappear. He kept engaging with it, clearly aware exactly how to keep people talking. Every time he said something new, it triggered another round of reactions. Some laughed, some felt like he was making light of something that deserved more seriousness. But either way, it kept the conversation running. What made his involvement particularly interesting was how it split the attention. Before he stepped in, the focus was entirely on what happened in that store. After he entered the conversation, part of the audience shifted towards his commentary. It became two separate discussions happening simultaneously, one about the actual incident and one about how he was choosing to respond to it. Jim Jones, on the other hand, stayed locked on his side of the story. He didn't draw for humor, he didn't try to lighten the moment, he kept returning to the same core point. This was about respect and how the situation was handled from the start. Even when he acknowledged he could have reacted differently, he never walked back his central argument. That contrast between the two responses added yet another dimension to everything. One person treating it with full seriousness, the other converting it into entertainment, and the audience splitting based on which energy resonated more with them. As time moved forward, conversations began branching out into store policies. People started sharing their own experiences. Some said they'd been in similar situations where stores honored the wrong price without any friction. Others said stores had refused them and nothing like this followed. It became clear that there's no universal standard for how these situations get handled, and that inconsistency is exactly what made the whole thing feel so relatable. It stopped being just about one moment in one store and turned into a broader conversation about everyday experiences, about expectations, and about the gap between how people believe things should be handled and how they actually are. Even people who had no idea who Jim Jones or 50 Cent were found themselves watching the clips and forming opinions, because at its core, it was a situation almost anyone could connect to. Most people have had some kind of disagreement in a store at some point. Maybe not at that intensity, maybe not with cameras rolling, but enough to understand the frustration behind it. By the time everything settled, the moment had already made its mark. It had traveled from a quick store stop to a viral clip to a full-scale online debate to something people would keep referencing long after the camera stopped. And even though the moment itself was over, the conversation around it didn't wrap up cleanly, because situations like this rarely have neat endings. There's no universal answer everyone lands on. Some will always feel one side was right. Others will feel the opposite, and some will say both sides could have handled it better from the start. But one thing is certain. That moment inside that store showed exactly how fast things can change, how quickly something simple can grow into something massive, and how once cameras are rolling, everything becomes content the entire world can watch and judge from their own couch. And even after all of that, the question that lingers stays the same. If that moment had been handled just a little differently right at the beginning, would any of this have happened? Or was it always heading in this direction the moment the energy shifted? That's the part people keep turning over in their heads even after the video ends. Replayed, reposted, and picked apart in 100 different ways. People started pulling specific lines from the footage, repeating them, turning them into captions, building entire threads around just a few seconds of content. That's how something like this outlasts the moment. It stops being just a clip and becomes a reference point. One theme that kept rising to the surface was how quickly respect can unravel in a public setting. Jim Jones walked into that store as a regular customer. By the middle of it, he felt like he was being treated as a problem. By the end, he was saying he felt like a criminal. That shift didn't take hours, it happened in minutes, and that's what caught so many people off guard. Viewers started asking themselves what they would have done in that same position. Some said they would have left immediately and avoided the whole thing. Others said they would have stood their ground the exact same way. Some admitted they probably would have reacted even more intensely. That's what made the conversation feel personal. It stopped being about watching someone else's moment and became about placing yourself in that same situation. Another detail that kept coming up was how many opportunities there were to stop things before they got out of hand. Multiple points where someone could have stepped in and redirected it. The manager could have approached more calmly. The explanation could have been clearer. The tone could have been softer. Even after things started getting tense, there were still windows where it could have been brought back down. But once emotions rise past a certain point, stepping back becomes genuinely difficult. Both sides felt they were right. Neither wanted to be the one to fold in front of everyone watching. And that dynamic is exactly what it looked like. Two positions held firm with no one willing to move first. The presence of other customers and employees only added more weight to it. When something unfolds in front of a crowd, the pressure multiplies. More eyes, more energy, more tension, and that environment alone can make a small issue feel far larger than it actually is. Once that kind of energy builds, it spreads through a room fast. As the online discussion kept going, some people started focusing less on the specific moment and more on the broader message underneath it. They talked about customer service standards, about how businesses respond when they make mistakes, about the importance of clear and respectful communication. Others raised the question of how the same situation can feel completely different depending on who you are and how you're perceived walking through the door. And then there were those who kept it straightforward. Two sides, one disagreement, neither handled perfectly, end of story. That range of perspectives is exactly what kept the conversation from dying down. Then there were those who zoomed out entirely and focused on the viral element itself, how fast it spread, how instantly people reacted, and how something that happened in one store in one city ended up being watched and debated by people everywhere. And that's something that keeps happening more and more. Moments that once would have stayed contained now go public in seconds.